Hi, guys. I wanted to welcome you to the Success Summit for EMRO Quantum. I wish I could be there with you. This just worked out that we had a family reunion that had been on the books for over a year, and I just couldn't get away from it. And so I wanted to see if I could be helpful by conducting a video here that would give you some thoughts on some research that I've been doing on energy medicine. I would like to talk a little bit about the history of it and why it's important, and then what some of the more recent scientific breakthroughs have been. And then thirdly, to talk a little bit about new applications. I think you'll be amazed at how fast this technology is being adapted into the healthcare industry. And then a little bit about the importance of this from the standpoint of drug-free cultures in our country and a drug-free environment. So I want to start by just talking with you a little bit about, think about the term energy medicine. I have begun, and this is just a personal choice, but I have begun using the term energy healing. And the reason I have is I think it describes for me more what I feel like I'm doing, and that is offering an alternative way to heal and to improve health. And for the people that I work with, and a lot of them are physicians, it leaves no confusion that what we're doing is in any way competitive with traditional medicine. It is a totally separate idea, totally separate science, and a whole different way of approaching our health. A little bit about the history of this. Can you imagine a time when there were no drugs in our world? None. Unless it was an herb or a naturally occurring ingredient. There were no acetaminophen and there were no Tylenols. And that was an amazing time. But since that time, for the last 5,000 years, most of that time has been related to non-drug use. Most generations of people around the world are not familiar with strong medications until the last perhaps 200 years out of the last 5,000. So we're going to talk a little bit about that history. Across the centuries, energy healing has been a major part of most cultures around the world. You guys are all familiar with the idea of the Egyptian culture some 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. And believe it or not, back in those days, they did surgery on the skull and penetrated into the brain. And to heal those wounds and to control the pain, they used electrical energy from an electric eel. Imagine it. But it was true and it was very effective. They had no idea what that was a precursor to at the time. And then more recently, we can look at, and you guys are, many of you are practitioners, familiar with acupuncture and the tremendous number of ways that acupuncture is proven effective in treating disease, in reducing pain. And if you look around the world, read you a few countries in which energy treatment or energy medicine was an integral part of their culture. Countries like China, India, Tibet, Japan, the Lakota Indians, the Hebrews, all had an integral part of their health system was this whole idea of energy medicine. So it's not new. We're not doing something new here that people don't understand. Most cultures around the world understand it and have practiced it for a long time. So what's the deal in the United States? Why is this so slow in becoming an integral part of our healthcare delivery system? Well, it has been derided. You can call it a lot of terms. Some people called it voodoo. Some people said it's just mystical. The term non-replicable was always a term that was used for energy medicine. And within the medical profession, one of the terms that was used was, oh, this treatment with microcurrents is just a placebo. Well, the reasons for that are many. One of the most important barriers to the growth of energy medicine in this country is something called the Flexner Report. If you haven't read it, you ought to get it and at least read the summary of it. It was written in 1910 by a man named Abraham Flexner, who described what the standard curriculum should be in a medical school for a licensed doctor. The problem with that was not only what he included, but what he excluded. So what he included was all kinds of medications were appropriate, surgery was appropriate, but you better not go around putting energy therapy into something or putting electrical currents into something, because you can lose your license. And so that is the barrier that we've been dealing with. The medical schools themselves have resisted it. And there's a small firm called Eli Lilly that was not at all in favor of drug-free therapy. So that's the history behind this, and that's why it's been so slow in catching on in the United States. Big Pharma has been a major resistor to all of this. But there now are breakthroughs. We're getting past the voodoo ideas. People now understand in the scientific community that this is valid, replicable, and is an important part of our health and who we are. And as a part of this new breakthrough in science, we are, in fact, beginning for the first time to discover who we are as a human being. Well, one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that the people who are making the major scientific breakthroughs in this new science, some are physicians, but many are not. Many of the innovators in energy medicine are physicists. And breakthroughs in the study of subatomic particles and how they behave, not only how they behave in an accelerator, but how they behave in our body, because we're made up of subatomic particles. How do they behave? How do they influence our health? They are part of who we are. So these breakthroughs are coming from physicists, they're coming from electrical engineers, and interestingly enough about all of this, guess what? They don't have any financial or political stake in the answers to all of these questions. They simply want to know, how can we improve our condition of health? So these breakthroughs are coming in many other areas. And what's happening is that some of this is in medicine, but some of this is coming from breakthroughs in how our bodies actually function. Would you believe that we have now documented over 17,000 different electrical currents and frequencies that are emitted from our bodies on a continuing basis, every day, every minute, every nanosecond, 17,000 different frequencies. We are energy. That's what we are. Well, how does that influence what we're learning? We're learning that these subparticles and the energy that we emit has a tremendous impact on our health. And if we are enwrapped in what we can now call a biofield of energy, and that is all of these 17,000 different pathways tracking through our bodies, carrying information to cells, carrying information to tissues, carrying instructions to our organs and how they're to perform. This is a highway of information of which we were not familiar until just the last few years, that dramatically affects our health. And if you want to know what screws up the interstate highway, consider a wreck. You can have wrecks in your biofield, and that disturbs the electrical energy in a particular part of your body, and as a result of that, adversely affects your health. So we can correct through a process called entrainment, those problems that are in our energy fields and bring those energy fields back into a healthy vibration. And if that happens, we see our health improve. No Tylenol, no acetaminophen, and no knife. Our bodies were designed to self-heal. We simply have ignored that capacity until very recently. It's important as we understand this to know that our health is affected by this entire biofield, much more dramatically than it's affected by various types of drugs. And the whole point to this is that there is a level of intelligence that is carried in this system that exceeds our own intellect. So we now know we have this Flexner report. We know it has become a barrier to access to critical health services that are now going to become available as a result of these new scientific insights. What we've really learned that's been the most helpful to me is to not think of this in terms of a standing wave of electromagnetic current. Think of it as intelligence, that these highways of energy are giving instructions to virtually every cell and every organ in our bodies. We are a living intelligence that we're now discovering goes way beyond anything we understood and way beyond anything medicine understood. And some of my discussions with physicians have been along the lines that everything they learned in the labs and everything they learned in medical school, a lot of that's going to turn out to be not obsolete, but there's going to be a second chapter to the book within which to interpret a lot of what we've learned in medical school. I would leave you in this segment of it with something my dad used to say to me, and that is, he said to me, you know, you're not nearly as smart as you think you are. And the older you get, the more you're going to realize it. And it's true. And I would sum it up by saying, I think it's important for you to approach EMRO quantum and these disks as seeing it as part of a much, much larger picture of a new science. And when you get up every morning, if you're confused at all by your disks and wonder how they work, maybe in more detail than you can explain, just stand in front of a mirror and say to yourself, I don't know what I don't know, because that's what the scientists are now saying as well. So what does it mean to be medication-free, drug-free? I mean, it sounds like a euphemistic term, but the real question is, can you really treat severe diseases and illnesses on a drug-free basis? I mentioned to you the whole idea of the Cleveland Clinic and what they're doing. There's another very small hospital called the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center that spreads out all over the Northeast, and whose chairman of orthopedics happens to also be the team physician for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, investing in professional football players is a multi-billion-dollar business, and changing the way you treat illnesses with these athletes is no small consideration. Today, the Pittsburgh Steelers, under the direction of Dr. Jack Bradley, who is the team physician, has begun treating all types of professional athletic problems, including MRSA, by the way, with broken bones, chronic non-unions, acute care, acute pain, and he is treating all of those now with electromagnetic waves. And his reason for that is that it heals faster, it happens more quickly, and there is no risk of drug interactions, toxins and those sorts of things that can get in the way of an athlete's health. So what's so important about this drug-free treatment idea? Great, it's for treatment for world-class athletes, but what the heck does that have to do with me and my family? Well, let me tell you what it's got to do with you and your family and the drugs that are now being put over the counter. In CVS, in Walgreens, and in commercial pharmacies all over the United States, we now are offering over 300,000 different medications, none of which require a prescription. Now, we know, as Americans, we know our own culture and the kinds of things that are going on in this country today. And we know one thing that's very interesting about all of that, and that is that 85% of the people who use these over-the-counter medications don't even read the label. And you want another interesting statistics, 80% of those people don't understand it after they read it. So what do we have here but a virtual cyclone of toxins being put into our healthcare system, being put into the average consumer, in which in most cases people have no idea what the consequences of it are. It's just made my headache go away. Also importantly, 100,000 calls a year are made to hospitals and to toxin centers. To give you some perspective on how this impacts our culture, 6,000 people a year die in this country from over-the-counter drugs. 6,000. How large is that? It is larger every year than all of the deaths in the Vietnam War. That's how big this problem is. So my message to you is, quite aside from anything else, we have a moral obligation to future generations to clean this act up and to get rid of these medications. And perhaps the single best solution to that today is energy healing. You don't need acetaminophen to get rid of a headache if you can put a little disc on your forehead and you lose the pain. So these are things that I want you to think about as you're at this summit conference. Think beyond the discs. Think beyond that to the social importance of what we're doing. Think beyond it to ways in which you can keep your kids or your grandchildren from getting on this highway to addiction and illness. My father told me once, and I mentioned it to you earlier, and I'll tell you again, the older you all get, the more you're going to realize what you don't know. So open your minds to this whole EMRO quantum idea and become more than simply a salesperson. Become an advocate for a different culture, for a different health in this country. And I hope you guys have a great conference, and I wish I could have been there, but hopefully these comments are a little bit helpful to you. Have a great day.